Hello, everybody. First off, I'd like to apologize to everyone. I know I said this video was supposed to come out a week ago, and obviously it didn't. So, in penance, I am going to be releasing 3 videos this week. Also as a kind of, holiday gift to everyone, which I hope everyone is having a good holiday season. But, let us begin. Welcome to the first video of what is going to be my discussions on the Legiones of Transhumans. I'm using the phrase Legios as opposed to Adeptus because, as I've just created the prehistories, it would behoove me to talk about the legions as they were in the Horus Heresy and directly afterwards, as opposed to the legions that we see nowadays. I am planning on creating second videos about each legion, which talks about their successors and the changes that we've seen to them over history. But as I'm going to be discussing the Horus Heresy here in the next few months, I thought it would be more important to actually talk about who the legions were and where they came from, so we can get that basis of understanding before we're talking about the current state of the lore. Though obviously, as you've seen in the title, this is a video about the Custodes, not about the Astartes. The Custodes are seen now as kind of just, a bodyguard and very, very elite strike troops because of the Indomitus Crusade, but they're so much more than that, and they're so much more complex that a lot of people just really don't know about. All they know about is the modern 40k stuff, where they simply just stand around the Imperial Palace, looking for enemies, looking for people trying to harm the Emperor, and now just very recently actually stepping off of Terra and going out into the universe. But again, they're so much more complex than simple bodyguards. While I'm talking about all of the Astartes and their legions and their Primarchs, it would be a disservice to them to not talk about the Custodes themselves, and to really cover why they're so important and why they're just so cool. The Legio Custodes, or known in modern day as the Adeptus Custodes, are the Emperor's personal cadre of transhuman warriors. These men and women are not Astartes. They're something entirely different altogether. Astartes are mass-produced, template-built soldiers that are beaten and crafted into specific forms and roles based on the traditions of their chapters and legions. Custodes are individually sculpted and formed pinnacles of mental and physical prowess. They are to the average Astartes as the Emperor himself was to the Primarchs. Vaguely similar, but far superior in scope. In recent days, they've taken a very limited role in the galaxy as a whole. Their first and most important task is the protection of the Emperor, which is now a shadow of what it had once been. Every single Custodes is sworn to the service and protection of the Emperor, but have failed in their most important task. During the Horus Heresy, they stood sentinel over the Emperor as he sat on the Golden Throne. He sat on the Golden Throne to repel the continuous onslaught of the demonic hordes pouring through the webway portal underneath the Imperial Palace. But, as the Siege of Terra began, and the hordes of the lost and the damned crashed against the impenetrable fortress of the Imperial Palace, the Custodes simply stood sentinel, taking very little part in the fighting. And as the Emperor rose from the throne and led the assault in the Anabasis operation aboard the Vengeful Spirit, 100 of the Custodes' finest went with him. But in the teleportation aboard, they were separated, being forced to fight endless hordes of demonic entities and legionaries in a mad dash to find their lord. Only a single Custodes made it to his master's side on time, the first of the Custodes to be created, Constantine Faldor. Since Horus's crippling of the Emperor and his eternal placement on the Golden Throne, the Custodes had become morose, scarred by their failure, and are desperate to stop even the slightest threat to their lord. They've become the gargoyles of the palace, as without his guidance, they simply fulfill a hollow oath to a lord that's long gone. The Emperor was a man that was born in the 8th millennium BC. He is an incredibly potent psyker, but more importantly, he's a perpetual. Perpetuals are absolute rarities amongst all races of the galaxy. Only a handful of perpetuals has ever been born in all of human history, but he isn't the focus of this video. The reason why this is important is because even before the calendars changed from BC to AD, he was incredibly intelligent, dexterous, and learned, and the 24 millennium leading up to the Age of Strife only compounded this power. So with over 30,000 years of study and research and discovery and life experiences, even while recovering from the revolution of AI and the Men of Iron, he was capable of seeing the growing disturbance in the warp caused by the Eldari's galactic hedonism. So, he prepared for the collapse of normality once again. Perpetuals generally follow a belief that they must be passive guardians and guides to humanity, not its rulers. But as humanity collapsed a second time, he finally changed his mind. While Terra burned and nuclear weapons savaged the world he had called home for 30,000 years, alongside the Sigillite Order, he began building and researching gene manipulation and human augmentation. He began by collecting children from the hellscape that was Earth, and started experimenting with their genetic makeup. While it isn't known if there was a learning curve that the Emperor failed to attain at first, it is known that eventually he succeeded, crafting Constantine Valdor. Unlike the later Thunder Warriors, and even later Adeptus Astartes, Custodes don't have implants within their bodies to achieve specific levels or creations. Their bodies are simply reconstructed on the most minuscule level, changing their bodies into the greatest the human frame could possibly attain. Children from 2 to 4 years old are set through decades of genetic enhancement, mental psychoconditioning, and mental training. They were individually sculpted by the Emperor himself into the absolute pinnacles humanity could achieve. Not in the sense of Olympic-level athletes or intellectual savants, but genetic enhancement, pushing them to a level incomprehensible by normal humanity. The Custodes border on the razor's edge of being inhuman, with the Emperor purposely drawing them back and retaining a trace of their humanity so they don't become something entirely different. Even the Astartes see the Custodes with a level of disbelief, like children sparring with professional MMA fighters. But the Custodes aren't just warriors. They're meant to be the Emperor's companions. Immortal in their longevity, their decades of training and ascendancy are also filled with an impressive amount of study and teaching of everything from warfare to politics to diplomacy to philosophy. While never being more learned or intelligent than the Emperor, they were his confidants and his guidance when he felt he needed it. They are warriors, scholars, ambassadors, and when needed, assassins. It's also said that this creation process renders them both incapable of wielding warp energy, as well as being very resistant to it. While it's unknown what this really means, it is clear that no Psyker or no Custodes will ever exist. But as the Unification Wars continued, and Terra was brought under a single ruler, the Emperor continued crafting these warriors, drawing from the children of a warlord he had defeated, taking the most stable, resilient, and intelligent of them to found his personal cadre. The point most people focus on when they're talking about Custodes is their physical prowess. Their strength is massively augmented, both a byproduct and a result of their physical expansion. Custodes stand at 10 feet tall, over a foot and a half taller than the average Astartes, and have greater strength to match. Their physical power is also augmented by the armor they wear. Much like power armor, their suits add to their strength, but unlike most power armor, each set of armor is individually crafted to the Custodes, so the inconsistencies or flaws in most armor is non-existent for Custodes. But more than their strength and their physical acumen, their physical reflexes make them stand head and shoulders above everyone else. As Valdor once donned his set of armor, he noticed 1/100th of a second delay in the response of his left shoulder plate. 1/100th of a second. I want you to try and start and stop a stopwatch in a single 100th of a second. That is the level that Custodes fight within. A level that isn't recognizable. Astartes can kill people within seconds, punching through their skulls or crushing their body and immediately moving on to the next. Custodes plan out their actions like a chess grand master. In Birth of the Imperium, a Custodes is desperately running to try and stop a bomb from detonating under the Imperial Palace, but he enters a room with over a dozen insurgents. Before he even adjusts his grip on his Guardian Spear, he has mapped out the quickest way to dispatch all of them, sorting by target threat, compensating for individual reaction times of the mortals, and the amount of time it would take them balanced against the confidence of their death. Astartes can clear a room of life within seconds. Custodes can do the same and already be on the move in a matter of moments. The mental psycho-conditioning of Custodes go through is twofold in its intent. Firstly, it makes them absolutely loyal to the Emperor, to the point of erasing their self-preservation. Their entire goal is to protect the Emperor, however they possibly can. In the short story, A Wolf of Ash and Fire, the Emperor is waging a campaign on a massive scrap world built by the Orcs. As they fight their way through the Orc hordes, the planet shudders, opening a massive rent in the scrap planet that the Emperor falls through. In less than a second, a half-dozen Custodes jump in after him, falling with him. Not a single one of them survives the fall, but that's not important to them. What's important is that there was a chance they could have, and if they could, then they could continue to protect him. This is the level of commitment they had to it. This action wasn't seen as a waste, simply Custodes fulfilling their duties. The second point is that it creates a neurosynergistic link between all the Custodes and the Emperor himself. Like a Vox bead, the Custodes can communicate with each other from across an entire planet, but unlike a Vox bead, it isn't so slow. They don't simply speak to each other mentally, they literally translate ideas and thoughts immediately to other Custodes. And when the mental faculties of these men and women can compute astrological calculations of planetary bodies in their heads, imagine how fast they can communicate. In the Siege of Terra, we see two Custodes touch their foreheads together, but this isn't a sign of intimacy, but one of necessity. One of the Custodians is taking over vigil of the Emperor's safety on the Golden Throne, so the forehead link communicates everything they could possibly need to know in a single instant. Possible vantage points assassins could take, most likely points of access of an invading host, how many Custodes are stationed nearby and how close they are, the coming and goings of people that service the Imperial throne every day and who they are and what they look like. All of this is in a single instant. This changing of the guard isn't a weak point of someone adjusting to a new position. It's as if the same Custodes never left in the first place. The Custodes are comprised of several orders and groups, so interactions between them occur regularly, but this neurosynergic link allows them communication and clarification instantly. The Adeptus Custodes don't follow a strict, tiered hierarchy like the Astartes or the Imperial Guard does. They follow an infinitely complex and weaving order of standing that constantly changes and fluxes according to the problems or needs of the situation at hand, though it can be reductively broken down into fairly specific rules. The highest authority in the Custodes is the Emperor himself. They are beholden to no one else, and no one else can order or maintain control over them. Just below the Emperor lies the Captain General. Constantine Valdor was the first to hold this position, interfacing directly with the Emperor on a daily basis and advising him and protecting him every moment of every day. Since the Emperor's internment, the Captain General speaks with the authority of the Emperor, and as such sits among the High Lords of Terra, voicing any necessities that might be appraised by their leadership. Just below the Captain General stands the Tribunes. These are the two most highly appraised and capable of the Tribunate, the 10 most outstanding Custodes alive on Terra. These 11 members, the Captain General, the 2 Tribunes, and 8 Tribunates, form the highest echelon of command within the Imperial Palace. Nothing is done without their approval, and nothing occurs out of their sight. The 10 Tribunates are constantly rotated with different members, as this allows for new perspectives and new ideas on security to constantly be appraised, eschewing the complacency that comes when people are placed in a perpetual role. Below these 11 stand the Custodian Prefectorates and Shield Captains. Prefectorates, or prefects, are chosen from the best of the Custodes, with exemplary service or exceptional actions taken in the Emperor's service. While incredibly highly ranked and considered the best among them, they actually have little command over other Custodes. This command is left to the Shield Captains. Shield Captains are Custodes that are tasked with direct and active command over the different groups and organizations that make up the Custodes order. Custodes that don't reside within the aforementioned groups resides within both the Sodalities and the Shield Companies of the Custodes. Sodalities are loosely formed, constantly changing groups of Custodes that are formed in their individual yet united completion of a specific task. Custodes trained in utilizing their infamous jet bikes are allied into a Sodality which they work and patrol together, but all stand as peers. None of them have command or priority over others. They're simply equals working together when needed, but usually separately. Shield companies are much more rigid formations of Custodes that actively work and fight together on a constant basis. The shield captain stands in charge of them, overseeing their deployment and objectives, while the individuals decide on the most efficient way to achieve these objectives. I'd like to cover a few notable shield companies as first, as these are most often the most, pardon my French, badass of the standard Custodes. The Shadow Keepers are the black garb Custodes that are in charge of the Dark Cells. The Dark Cells is the prison system under the Imperial Palace that holds the most vile, abominable, and depraved things and entities within the galaxies. AI systems, gene splicer tyrants, chaotic artifact, and everything that the universe would be better without is contained within these cells. The Shadow Keepers have absolute say over these cells, with only the Captain General capable of ordering their fealty. A full company of Custodes is devoted to this task. However, in modern day, since the opening of the Great Rift, the Shadow Keepers have been constantly leaving Terra in large quantities. Many of the items within their cells simply vanished during the splitting of the galaxy, being cast all throughout it. So, the Shadow Keepers have taken a very active role, deploying nearly their full strength when one of their charges is discovered or rediscovered. The Aquilon Shield are the Custodes that are tasked with guardianship or protection details of simply random people. Doomscryers are a group of psychers in the Imperial Palace that constantly seek for threats in the future of the tides of the warp. But in their search, they can also find people that can stop or avert coming crises. If these people are found, then an Aquilon Shield is sent to guard over them. These charges could be a High Lord of Terra, an Imperial Navy Admiral, or an entirely confused PDF militia captain. Anyone that has a chance to support the Imperium in a significant way is granted a guardian from the most capable and trained bodyguards and a cadre of transhumans trained in the art of protection and guarding. In more recent times, the Custodes have created the Shield Company of the Solar Watch. They consider the Imperial Palace to extend all throughout the solar segmentum, and as such are the first line of Custodes defense into the Sol system. They are master engineers, overseers, and captains of the millions of bastions, defense systems, armored guard fleets, point defense satellites, and defensive minefields that constitute the entirety of the Sol system. The only planet that doesn't fall under the purview of that is Mars, a point that is often contested by the Custodes and the adepts of Mars. If the Solar Watch sally out to meet an enemy rather than within the cusp of the Sol system, they prioritize speed and decapitating strikes, destroying an army's capability to put up a reasonable defense, then leaving, allowing inferior forces to finish the fight, because the Watch of the Sol system cannot lack for a single second. Lastly, there are the Emissaries Imperatus. Throughout 10,000 years, there have been times that the Custodes have felt that the Emperor has reached out to them in their times of meditation or rest, speaking to them with guidance towards the strengthening of the Imperium. Custodes don't dream, but every once in a while, chosen Custodes will have a dream about something in the future or a threat that is coming, or about a specific Custodes that should be raised to a higher level. These dreams can lead to the creation of crusade hosts, the granting of ancient weapons to particular champions, or a change in certain policies towards an eventual goal. Those Custodes that feel they've been spoken to multiple times count themselves among the Emissaries Imperatus, a group of very, very few individuals that gather in meditation for Terran months, seeking wisdom through the Emperor's guidance. They don't see this as a divine action or godly wisdom, simply their creator reaching out through a neurosynergistic link that once bound all of them together intrinsically. It shouldn't be thought, however, that the Custodes that don't comprise these select shield companies are simply stationary guards that just sit and watch. They spend their immortal lives constantly working and training to serve the Emperor in any way they possibly can. As stated earlier, the 10 members of the Tribunate are constantly rotated, bringing both younger members and new older members to weigh in and elaborate upon new opinions to constantly refine their defenses. There is another practice, though, that every Custodes takes part in, the practice of Bloodgames. A blood game occurs when a handful of Custodes are chosen to leave their posts and enter the continent-spanning city that surrounds the Imperial Palace. These Custodes are then tasked to infiltrate the palace and attempt to assassinate the Emperor. They will do anything and everything to achieve this goal, and will genuinely attempt to slay the Emperor as well as they can. Now, if they somehow got past the companions, they obviously wouldn't actually do so, but the singularly devoted mental faculties of the Custodes are bent to this singular task. These men and women are the most trained, learned, and prepared people to defend the Imperial Palace in the universe. So what happens when they try to circumvent these defenses? That is what they want to find out. During the Horus Heresy, there was a short story that was written about this very practice, where we follow a Custodes that infiltrated the Imperial Palace during the Horus Heresy. He spent days ingratiating and hiding himself among, I believe, forced labor gangs that were mining stone and granite for the Imperial Palace. Because of the ogrons and large, heavily built servitors that they used for this, his bulk was able to blend in very well. So, using this group, he infiltrated the palace while also buying a few toxins to lower his heart rate and his bodily systems so he wouldn't be detected by the scanners and appear just as a normal person. He infiltrated the palace, constantly changing into several different disguises of a servant, of a guard, of, I believe, also a servitor for a short time, slowly getting closer and closer through the dozens of layers of defense of the Imperial Palace, until eventually he made it all the way to the Chambers of Dorn, which, obviously during the Horus Heresy, the Emperor wasn't on the Golden Throne at this time, so they weren't trying to assassinate him. They were simply trying to infiltrate the palace to assassinate someone of importance, which obviously would be Dorn. So, all of these illicit chemicals that they bought, all of these disguises that they took, all of these ways that they got into the palace are now known and understood, so anybody else that tries to do the same will never be able to. So imagine when this kind of specific, very intuitive practice has taken over 12,000 years. How strong do you think their defenses are? How unassailable could they actually be? However, greater than these semi-loose formations that Custodes may temporarily adhere to, all of them are members of specific chambers. These 8 chambers are divided by both strategic placement and individual capability. The most well-known chamber of the Custodes is that of the Companions. These are the 300 Custodes endlessly tasked with the personal protection of the Emperor's body. They are hand-picked by the captain of the Custodes for a myriad of personal traits, most notably mental acuity and physical fortitude. They stand unendingly in constant vigil, standing still for Terran years, constantly poised on the edge of combat readiness. Despite the outer layers of the Imperial Palace's protection, and the actions of the other 9,700 Custodes within the palace, these 300 stand always prepared to fight at a moment's notice. Because of this mental drain and requirement, these 300 are constantly rotated out by new members to stand guard until even their ultimate transhuman minds begin to drag due to the drain. A delay in reaction time of even 1/10 of a second is cause for an immediate rotation of the guard, so no gap can be found in their ultimate vigil. The Hycanatoi make up the bulk of the 10,000. The image of the Custodes takes the shape of the Hycanatoi, their aramite armor and golden guardian spear denoting them of the Emperor's warriors. They are in no way the rank and file of the Custodes, as they are still peerless warriors in combat and terrifying intellects on a diplomatic mission, but they are the largest majority of these elites. Veterans of the Hycanatoi can become Vexillus Praetors, the proud carriers of the Custodes standards, only granted to veterans of numerous battles. The Thoranatoi form the heavy assault branch of the Custodes. These Custodes wear Terminator armor of a class much higher than that of their Astartes cousin. Their battle plate is much heavier and more resilient than Astartes' plate, but also allows for significantly freer movement due to the individual crafting of each armor for its wearer. They also wield the vaunted Adrathic weaponry, or disintegration weapons that ignore an armor's capability, melting armor and flesh alike on a molecular level. These weapons are only entrusted to the Custodes and no one else because of just how potent they are. The Cataphractoi compose one of the oldest roles that the Custodes have taken. Even during the Unification Wars, The most important focus of the Emperor's companions was that of mobility. They would travel with him at all points, always scouting ahead or behind for any possible threat to his person. So the Cataphractoi are an amalgamation of 11,000 years of this focus, with unmatched capabilities on jet bikes and rapidly moving vehicles. Outstripping even white scars upon jet bikes, they can move at speeds that would damage a mortal's body, the g-force of their movement physically damaging to anyone other than these peerless transhumans. The Epheiroi comprise one of the most secretive of the Custodes chambers. These members are the most highly trained of the 10,000 in the art of secrecy, counterintelligence, and assassination. These are the few of the Custodes that leave the Imperial Palace, hunting down any and all threats to the Emperor on Terra and within the Sol System. It's popularly believed, yet not necessarily proven, that the Epheiroi maintained operational command of the Officio Assassinorum during the Horus Heresy. However, since this time, the Officio has garnered its own individuality, working separately, yet perhaps alongside these assassins in gold. The Moritoi comprise the smallest active organization on Terra. These are the Custodes that are grievously damaged in combat to the point that their transhuman physiologies can't recover. So, like Astartes, they are placed in dreadnought shells. Like the Astartes, these dreadnoughts are walking tanks of sheer might and firepower, but also ancient wisdom. Many Custodes stand for thousands of years before this internment, and as such are preserved for both their combat capability and knowledge of particular fields of importance. The Moritoi have likely never numbered more than 100 in their history, but should not be discounted in their combat capability. They are clad in a unique form of Contemptor dreadnought armor, which is the largest and most resilient of its kind. The Dan Canatoi are a hard chamber to talk about, as absolutely nothing is really known about them. Their role is to stretch out into the galaxy and hunt down traitors, mutants, and chaos wherever it may arise, cutting them down well before they could even imagine threatening the Emperor. But so many reports state that the Custodes never leave Terra after the Horus Heresy. I've said multiple times in this video that the Custodes are bound to Terra, but some stories seem to suggest otherwise. Diolos Acrodius, which was the founder of the Dan Canatoi, was grievously wounded on the Battle of Cygnus Prime, the planet where the Blood Angels were almost eradicated. He vowed to exterminate enemies wherever they may be, but again, the Custodes didn't leave Terra after the Civil War. The most likely assumption I can make is that these Dan Canatoi didn't stand on Terra during the siege, likely due to inability rather than desire. As such, they would be undertaking a penitent crusade of sorts, seeking clemency and forgiveness in the dark places between the stars, too ashamed to return to their homeworld after being unable to stand with the Emperor in his final days. The last chamber of Custodes is incredibly unique in its purview, and the most interesting personally. The eyes of the Emperor are the Watchers in the Dark that stretch throughout the Sol System and beyond. Custodes are functionally immortal, even more so than their Astartes cousin, but time is the greatest enemy of all, even Custodes. Throughout their service, they may receive more and more injuries, augmetic replacements making up for lost eyes, or ligaments, or damaged organs, or simply, they grow old. Several thousand years of ever-vigilant watch would wear down even the most powerful of transhumans, because at the end of the day, they're still human in some small regard. So, much like the Emperor's companions, any trace hints of a loss of their capability can prompt them to concede their post. A tenth of a second of delay in reaction time, not due to fatigue, but genuine loss of ability, is more than enough reason for one of the 10,000 to step down. They do this so another younger and more capable Custodes can be developed, ensuring absolute capability of every member. So, these veteran Custodes give up their armor and their weapons and simply disappear. No one knows for sure where they go, but what is known is that their loyalty to the Emperor is never in question. They do whatever they must to stand as early warning systems, either building networks of informants and spies, or simply placing themselves near positions of power. They are ever vigilant for growing unrest, disloyalty, or distant enemies looming on their horizon. If such a plot is ever found, they send a message to the acting Captain General, allowing for a preemptive strike from the Epheiroi or Dan Canatoi well before a true threat is formed. I'm going to try to keep my composure for this last one here. Lastly, I try to be impartial in my lore description or understanding of different perspectives, as 40k is such a massive expanse of lore and reading. This is why I always say, at the end of the day, lots of points of lore are whatever you choose it to be. But this final point is very agitating to me, so I'll probably get a little worked up while I discuss this. In the last few years, Games Workshop and Black Library have confirmed that there are female Custodes among the 10,000. This has led to a lot of ire from some fans, railing that it's a change simply made to pander to larger audiences, rather than actual lore-supported changes. But this is so far from the truth. The quote that most people use to argue against female Custodes is a line in the novel Master of Mankind, which states that the Custodes are created from the, quote, sons of defeated warlords. Sons is explicitly used here, but as anyone who reads Black Library novels know, explicit usage like this is rarely definitive. The authors writing the Horus Heresy often ask the creative directors why female Custodes didn't exist. And honestly, there isn't a good reason why not. Yes, they haven't been written about before. Yes, there is that single line in a single novel. And sure, transhuman women haven't been covered in 40k. But let's be honest. This is kind of just misogyny on some level. The Emperor himself is credited to individually and partially crafting each of the original 10,000 Custodes. He spent time crafting and building these people on a molecular level, forming whatever it was he needed. Do you think the Emperor was incapable of doing this to women? You think his absolutely indomitable intelligence was only limited to the male form? Yeah, it makes sense why there are no female Astartes. Personally, I don't think there should ever be female Astartes, but female Custodes make sense. Astartes are mass-produced assembly line creations that eschew individuality for tried and true exact replicas. Boys that are taken aren't, over time, molded into a specific form or allowed to flourish under specific ideals. They are beaten, broken, and reforged into exact specifications needed by the chapter. Finding neophytes that fight and act similarly to the chapter is not only useful, but essential in the creation process. Everything from body modification to psycho-indoctrination are meant to beat them into a single specific form, so they have the best chance of the gene seed taking hold. The gene seed is what makes an Astartes an Astartes. It rewrites their biology, but it takes both an exceptionally resilient man that already exhibits the actions and mentality of the chapter it's taken from. If a gene seed of an Imperial Fist is implanted in a blood-frenzied berserker from a feral world, it probably wouldn't hold very well, due to the fundamental difference in them. During the Siege of Terra, Basilio Foe, who is a gene tyrant of the Old Knight, explicitly stated that the soul of an Astartes is important in the creation process. Like can only exist with like. So gene seed taken from a male body and transferred to a female body is such a gigantic shift in neophyte condition and form that it would likely never take hold if understood from the perspective of existing lore. But again, Custodes aren't implanted with genetic stock. They are rewritten on a molecular level. It's a fundamental difference in the creation process that people conveniently ignore when talking about female Custodes. So yes, it makes sense that they exist. No, it doesn't threaten my masculinity to have female Custodes. If you see anyone arguing that they shouldn't exist, ask them why. Their arguments will likely never amount to anything more than that single line in Master of Mankind and the fact that they haven't been written about before. People that have objectively read the lore know that there isn't a real reason why they shouldn't be. It's a sentiment felt by the authors that are literally currently writing the lore itself. At some level, it's just bigotry. Let me lower my blood pressure here a little bit. This was the first video in my Legiones videos. Next, I'm obviously going to be covering the Dark Angels, which, unfortunately for me, are the most complex organizational structure within the Astartes, but it'll be fun to talk about. Over the last month, I've been rereading the Horus Heresy. I've currently read through 3 of the books and about 26 of the short stories, so if you know anything about the Horus Heresy, I'm about a 20th of the way done. So it's going to take me a very, very long time to get through it. But since I'm just now getting out of school and just graduating, I'm going to have a lot more time to put into this. So, with all that being said, I'm planning on releasing a couple Horus Heresy videos every month, probably every other week, as opposed to the weekly that I'm kind of doing right now. To do this, I'm going to offset. It's going to be a Horus Heresy video and then a Legiones video. So by the time I finish all of the Legions, I should be most of the way through the Heresy and hopefully talking about the Siege of Terra. But that's neither here nor there. If you're still listening, then thank you for letting me talk so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you, and goodbye.